Guy Vanderhaeg, thank you for that introduction. I know that Guy likes to hang out at Calories. That's where he took the CBC's Matt Galloway. Calories is in his neighborhood, and he likes to hang out there. Now, do you have a favorite space like that, a favorite third space? By that, I mean, you don't have, do you have a place outside of your home or your workplace where you can go without spending a bunch of money to talk to people and connect with your community? It could be a pub, a coffee shop, a church, a gym. Libraries often rate very high on people's third space destinations. The Regina Central Library is in the midst of a campaign that puts a dollar value on that space. So, if you're in Regina, you may have seen a billboard stating for every dollar invested in a new central library, the return on investment will be $7.58. So coming up, we're going to speak to the CEO of the Regina Library about why they feel this campaign is needed. We'll also hear from a Regina city planner and visionaries in Saskatoon and Regina who are in the midst of creating very cool multi-use spaces. We also want to hear from you. Where's your favorite third space? A place where you feel comfortable hanging out and where you might even get into a conversation with someone. How important is it for cities to invest in public spaces where people can just hang out without spending money? Call 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. Well, as I was just mentioning, the library does have this billboard campaign that says for every dollar invested in a new central library in Regina, the return will be $7.58 for the community. There are also posters that say every dollar invested in Regina Public Libraries as a whole brings a 200% return on investment. Jeff Barber is the CEO of Regina Public Library. I spoke with him on Friday and asked him what that means.
There are different kinds of economic return studies. The one that talks about a 200% return was a study based on originally a Toronto model that was developed and used in actually a number of libraries across the country, where it looks at direct programs and services and the value of those to people in the community who take advantage of them.
How tricky is it to put a value on some of the things the library offers? Like, sure, you could go through my house and get a dollar value for all the library books we have out right now, but all the other things that the library offers, how do you actually put a dollar value on that?
You're right. It's very tricky. I think in terms of this particular study, and ultimately different kinds of studies have different kinds of limits. But one thing that's quite common to most of them that you'll see, the 200% return from our spring campaign is there. You'll notice around Regina too right now that we have a return for Central Library alone for the construction and operation of Central Library, $7.58 return on every dollar invested, based on the Catalyst Committee work a few years ago and the economic return study that they did that is specifically construction and operation of Central Library. So different studies take different perspectives. But one of the things that's common about them is that they rarely actually consider some of those intangibles. They're often very quantitatively based, but in terms of actually saying, you know what, this person came to the library and this person improved their English by 2 levels, for example. Those studies don't take into account the economic impact of what has it meant for that person in terms of maybe they've been able to get a promotion, maybe they've been able to get a job where they were having trouble getting one before. So all of those individual, very personal impacts are typically not considered at all in these studies because they are massive study undertakings. They look very much directly in the 200% return, for example, very much at the library offers early reading programs. this kind of program in the market would cost this much for a participant, and this number of participants are coming through this program, there's usually a bit of a discounted rate. So often, if for example, you say, well, this program in the community, it might cost someone $20 an hour to get that kind of program service, we would maybe discount that by about 80% and come up with a value. So it's really looking at the value of doing something or taking advantage of a program and service, and does not look at the long-term value of that person and how has that changed their life, how has that brought value to them and to the community.
The campaign, though, is very much focused on those results that came from the Catalyst Committee's return on investment figures. And I'm curious as to why you're trying to communicate those numbers to the public. What are you trying to say by sharing those numbers?
It's the current campaign where we talk about $7.58 from a dollar invested. Specifically, that is central library and central library operations. It goes along with, and the other half of that campaign that you maybe saw is also a look at who uses the central library in Regina, and ultimately trying to demonstrate that especially in a city Regina's size, people from all over the city use the central library. So it was a follow-up campaign to a spring campaign where we talked about some similar library facts, but these ones very much focused on being clear that the central library is not just a downtown thing. The central library is an asset for the entire city and is used by people around the entire city. And in terms of the economic return, we did have that very specific look at the economic return of constructing and operating a central library in downtown Regina from a study that looked at the library, but also some other public assets. So it was a good kind of external objective look at that. And as we came across kind of our first campaign in the spring, the feedback that we were getting was telling us, there is an understanding out there about the library, but there isn't so much an understanding about why the central library matters to the whole city. And there is not so much an understanding that in a city like Regina, everyone uses the central library. So in our focus of the campaign in the second part, we thought, well, let's answer those questions that people seem to have.
Does putting a dollar value on it, does that resonate with people? Are you trying to help people make economic sense of the expenditure that it might take to build a new central library?
I think to a degree, yes. I think in terms of and perhaps through your program, you might get different kind of feedback around how people look at the public library. But yes, there are people who are interested in that return on investment, that very, I guess, seemingly straightforward dollars and cents look at where is the value. I think you'll also find other people who are interested more in the qualitative aspects of not only a central library but of public libraries in their community, and what is the social impact, what is the impact on the community from a qualitative sense of the services that public libraries provide and the people who use them. So I think it's not necessarily looking at, this is the way to look at public libraries, but we recognize in our community there are different people who recognize and appreciate different aspects of the value of the public library.
We'll talk more about the qualitative aspects, the social aspects of the library in a minute. But for people who are outside of Regina who may not be following developments on the Central Library all that closely, just give us an update on where things are at with the plan for a new Central Library. Do you have a location? How many years away are we now from a new Central Library in Regina?
I can. The first question: do we have a location? Not yet. I'll get to that in a second. In terms of how long before, I would say that we are probably 4 to 5 years away from a new library. What has happened and where we are at the moment is in the summer, City Council approved the debt required to build our central library, and they approved in principle the funding needed to raise the money to make those debt payments. The approval in principle of the funding to make the debt payments was in principle because in mill rate, essentially the mill rate supports that. The mill rate decision for council has to come forward at budget time. So they approved it in principle, but that decision will come to City Council in their budget deliberations. I think that starts in about a month. So we're there with that approval of debt from City Council in July. What we have done is started to set the stage for the program that we told council we would be following, which was a procurement process that is very much tied to being open to the market and being open to what are developers doing out there, what kinds of things do they have in mind, and how can we take advantage of that to get the best value and the best option for the library, while at the same time making sure that we are meeting the library's needs.
So at this point, you probably don't know the final dollar amount, how much this will cost, because I do want to ask you how will the library pay for it?
Yeah, and we have a range of costs that we provided to council in the summer. But in terms of paying, the library has a reserve fund that we have been saving into for the Central Library project for a number of years. And we also have recently approved our fund development program that has a working goal of $3 million. And we're looking at the debt funding that the city provided, which is in the range of kind of 92 to 119 million. So all of those pieces together are what we have to work with, and that is as we go out to the market, that is what developers will know. This is what we have to work with, and that is an all-in cost. That is absolutely everything. And that's how we have compiled the money. And as I mentioned earlier, the library mill rate here in Regina is what, over a period of 25 years, just like a mortgage, pays that money back.
So I think people probably listening want me just to cut to the chase. Like, how will this affect them? Is it going to mean an increase in their property taxes, or will the public be paying out of pocket for this at all?
It is, the library mill rate is a mill rate on property taxes for Regina businesses and individuals who have homes. So yes, it is. The library mill rate is a property tax, essentially, that is specifically targeted toward the library.
Do you know how much that could be for people?
It is in 2025, and it's a mill rate that is approximately 0.5% of like the civic mill rate. So it is like setting aside 0.5% of the mill rate in each year for 5 years. So in 2025, what that would mean, and we often base this on an average homeowner. So for an average homeowner in Regina, that is 96 cents a month.
Okay. Do you feel like when the budget is tight, do you feel like the library ends up pitted against other big city infrastructure projects? Like, I'm wondering if you can make your case why Regina would benefit from a new downtown library.
I think, understandable. We are very, very much cognizant of the economic times and of some of the challenges that we're facing. I think in terms of public libraries and the Central Library in particular, but public libraries in general, we are we are that place at the same time that when the economy is tough, or when dollars are hard to find, public libraries are those places that people go, because in fact, as you walk in the door and you take advantage of services, you can take advantage of those services in that, favorite third space. You can take advantage of that without having to spend money, without having to exchange cash at a counter. So these kinds of times are actually those times when a public library, and certainly in our case, a long-awaited central library, will make that biggest difference.
Tell me a little bit more about the role that you see libraries playing in filling that third space role. That is what we're going to talk about for the remainder of the show. And so how do you see libraries contributing to that, a place to hang out and socialize without the expectation of spending a lot of money?
Yeah, public libraries are, and it's one of those, I would say, just a bit of a perspective thing on it. I think sometimes we've also had questions about, well, why are public libraries getting larger when in fact there's so much available digitally, when people can stream, when they can download books, and part of that answer, certainly a part of it, is that people are still very much users of physical books and physical materials that libraries circulate. But a part of that reason is in fact that third space. It's that fundamentally you're gathering people, you're gathering more people, and as you might expect, human beings take a lot more space than books. So
human beings with babies and strollers.
And so as you're looking at, okay, we're circulating materials, people are downloading them at home, whatever, but we still have that very traditional lending going on. At the same time, we are that space in town where you can also come, and perhaps there is a teaching kitchen where 20 people can learn how to cook. Perhaps there is digital engagement where classrooms can come and use video and interactive tools to learn about dinosaurs or learn about the ocean. So it's the things that people come and do, and come to perhaps do a community crossword where you just sit down for a while and work on a jigsaw puzzle, and someone else comes and sits down, and where you have perhaps had people who would otherwise be in isolation, you are creating community, and you're letting people connect. So as a place to create community, you're creating that with humans. So I think that third space for people, and ultimately one of the things that's great about public libraries is that, yes, you work toward developing plans and developing services, but within Saskatchewan, for example, public libraries are legislated to do whatever they need to do to meet the needs of community. So public libraries are these constantly changing, easily morphable into whatever a community wants at any given time.
Do you know if demand for libraries is going up or down?
Demand for libraries goes up over time, and it, as kind of you might expect, it goes up in different ways. We still, as I think I mentioned a minute ago, that there's still very strong demand for physical materials, and we have grown our physical book collection in recent years. But the increase in digital use of materials that, of course, took off at COVID did not go down. So people love them. And so that demand goes up. We see as we're offering services and programs, as we're bring in a speaker, have a special event. We, of course, this Sunday, actually, of course, we have coming up, it's an RSO Sunday. So the RSO has a free library concert here on Sunday afternoon. We have growing demand and growing use of space, and that's one of the things in our central library conversation that, when the RSO comes, we have to clear out a part of our collection, store it in a meeting room so that we can house the concert and the people who come to it, making that part of the collection very difficult to access and using up one of only 3 meeting rooms that then can't be booked by someone to use. So that space and that growing use by people is why libraries continue to grow. And of course, our city grows as well. It is now twice as big as it was when the Central Library was built.
Jeff, so good to talk to you today. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
That is Jeff Barber. He is CEO of the Regina Public Library. I spoke to him on Friday. If you have thoughts on what he said, you can call us today, 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. We did get a call from Kathy in Regina who wanted to tell people that you can also rent art from the Regina Public Library. They've got information on that on their website. I'm Leisha Grabinski. You are listening to Blue Sky. Our guests today for the rest of the show spend a lot of time thinking about what makes cities good places to live. And it really builds on some of the things we heard from Jeff Barber with Regina Public Library. So Adam Dawson is the Director of Planning and Development Services with the City of Regina. She is in our Regina studio. Autumn, hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. And then beside you, we've got Marian Donnelly. She's the CEO and founder of the Creative City Centre, an organization in the midst of moving into an exciting new space. Marian, hello.
Hi, Leisha. Long time no see.
I know. It's good to see you. And then we also have with me here in our Saskatoon studio, Crystal Buchert, owner of Building Studio Inc. She designs residential and commercial spaces and currently has a project in the works to reimagine the city's bus barns. City. Crystal. Hello. Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome to the show. So you were all listening to the conversation that I had with Jeff Barber there from Regina Public Library, and I want to pick up on part of that conversation about third spaces. So Autumn, why don't you kick things off? Where does that term third space come from?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the term itself was coined in a book in the late 1980s, so 1989, by Roy Oldenburg in his book called The Great Good Place. And so really the concept is your home or where you live is your first space, and where you work is your second space, and your third space is really where people want to, where they want to be in their spare time. And I think looking back at the time frame in which this book was published, you can see that in 1989, when it was published, it was a time when we were seeing suburbanization and people really, valuing their private spaces. And so we were losing some of that public space and where people would gather because they were choosing to stay home and use their car and travel to and from and not necessarily gather in that third space. So it becomes important in community building to ensure that there's spaces for people to be together and where they want to be and where they choose to be.
So because you are with the City of Regina, Autumn, I just want to ask you about the broader plans for Regina, how the library fits into that, and how you imagine people utilizing third spaces in Regina like that.
Yeah, for sure. Through our neighborhood planning process and our thought process in terms of making sure that there are these third spaces, we have what we've used as our terminology is the complete neighborhood,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
and making sure
mixed
that
use,
there's
right?
Yeah, mixed use. Making sure that there's space for people to live, people to work, and to do your everyday service, and making sure that you have places to enjoy, park space, community spaces, and making sure that that's all a component of a complete neighborhood.
When I was looking up the actual definition of what might fall under that label of third space, it kind of opened my eyes to sort of the realm of possibilities. So obviously libraries is part of that, coffee shops, pubs, but then churches were listed, gyms, any place where you gather. And my kids dance, and they dance in the basement of a church. So this was top of mind on the weekend, and we took our kids for their lesson, and people were mingling after. They had coffee and lunch, and you could just see people intersecting with one another. So that was a third space example I hadn't thought of until I started thinking about this show. Crystal, I'm curious about the kind of work that you do and how this idea of creating spaces where people can mix, how does that inform the kind of work that you do?
Good question. With our commercial work and our community-based work, it's community-based projects. Like some of these are more social projects and social lifestyle projects. So with our current project with the bus barns, turning that into a place, a third place where everyone can feel welcome and creating that public square, making sure that there's budget for that and there's space for that.
So are you thinking about return on investment on that sort of?
Bit, yeah, a little bit. It is a way to augment what's happening in the building, and it does create a draw for the building as well. So it's a place where the public can come in and feel welcome and not necessarily have to feel like they have to visit someone in the building, and a place where those accidental interactions can happen and friendships are made and so forth.
So how do you create a space like that?
Right. Well, you have to have the space for it. And it has to be very flexible, like in terms of design, a very flexible space that can function as just benches that people can sit around, or the restaurant patio can spill out into it, or someone can have a performance, or, have a rooftop band play, and nighttime, daytime, morning, like it has to go with every age group and every time of day.
I just want to go to Marian to kind of hear her thinking on this, and we'll come back to you, Crystal, to learn more about the Bus Barns project. But Marian, how does this concept of third space influence the type of work that you do? And I think we should let people know what the Creative City Centre is, because people outside of Regina won't be familiar. So just tell me how all of those ideas kind of come together for you.
Well, the Creative City Centre is definitely a third space. It is a gathering space. It's a community arts center. And so in our former home, we had artists working in their studios, but we also had a performance space and gallery space and a classroom space. And we're going to have all of those things in our new facility as well. But we will also be the home to 6 other arts organizations. So there will be like a lot of collaborating that happens. But I think that, like the bus barns in Saskatoon remind me of the TTC bus barns in Toronto that were converted into art spaces. I just think it's so important for people to have a place to go, to experience art, or to gather sort of in community. It did used to be churches was the primary place. Even before that, it used to be around the well was in the city of the village, and people would gather around the well to get their daily gossip fix. But we don't have that well anymore, and so we have to create these places where people can find either an experience that impacts them, or they can find like-minded souls. So if I give you an example of spoken word, we started spoken word programming in Regina in 2011. There was no spoken word or poetry happenings or anything like that before then. And since that time, we've actually developed a whole community of people who are spoken word artists or poets, or they just enjoy that medium, and they all become friends, and they see each other every month at our shows. And the same thing can be said for music concerts. Whatever type of music that you're into, if you're going to keep going to different music shows, whether they're metal bands or folk artists or classical, you keep going to those events and you keep seeing other people at the events. Wasn't that a good show last month? What did you think about that one? You start these conversations, and before you know it, you have a friend.
Yeah.
I'm wearing my Fata Dance hoodie today, and Fata Dance is actually another great example of a space where community is built. I met you at Fata Dance. Mm-hmm. I met Nicole
That's
Huck
many
at
years
Fata
ago.
Dance. It is, but you know what? I still think of you as a friend.
Yeah.
And it's because we had that shared experience.
Yeah.
So I think it is about those shared experiences. It's about finding people that enjoy the same things you enjoy. It's about, just sharing those passions or things that you enjoy in life. I mean, it can't all be work, and it can't all be cooking soup in the kitchen. You've got to have other things to do.
Yeah. And for me, it's all about meeting other people and building community, like you said, Marian.
Yeah.
Autumn, would you include sporting facilities under that umbrella of third space? Gyms, probably for sure, but just what are your thoughts on the range of spaces that could invite this kind of mingling and lingering?
Yeah, I think sporting spaces are certainly third spaces, and it includes a full spectrum of places where people want to be. And so it can be places where you pay to get in. It can be places where, you have access for free. But it should be, a variety of spaces. And when we're doing community building, we want to make sure that there are those variety of spaces. They can't all be paid spaces, and they can't, necessarily all be targeted to one sector of the population. You need to have a variety of spaces for the community to gather.
So, Autumn, what is the role of the city in making sure that there are adequate spaces like this? Like, we've got people from the private sector, but you're very much, you're part of the city of Regina. When we talk about the library, we're talking often about public dollars. And so what do you see as the role of the city, Autumn, in making sure we have these third spaces?
Well, I think we can influence in a number of ways. We can influence through, design requirements, either through the public realm, making sure that even if you can't access the space because there's something you have to pay to get in, at least the space around that venue maybe is somewhere where people want to gather, like steps, or the sidewalk is wide enough so that you can have those bench spaces. And maybe that's the space where people gather or hang out. I remember as a youth, that's kind of where you gathered, and that became the space where you gathered on the steps and meet it there, and then you figure out where you want to go. So I don't think that you can think of it in one way or one way. Mm-hmm. There's a number of places that you can interject, and the city can also incentivize spaces, ensure that when we're designing and building communities, that there's plenty of opportunity for those free spaces, and as well as for those businesses to grow to become third spaces as well.
Mm-hmm. This show also made me think about my grandfather, who was in Regina, and he would have coffee every single day at Dairy Queen with all his friends, and that was their third space. A very important spot for my grandfather. Crystal, tell us more about what you're doing with the bus barns. Like, what is the project that you're doing?
Right. So the Caswell Bus Barns, we purchased the old Saskatoon Transit buildings just west of downtown Saskatoon. 42,000 square feet of adaptive reusable space, and we're renovating the building and turning it into an arts and culture hub. So in the building will be a theater performance space, quite large. That's also kind of a community center, so kind of like a drop-in. There's rehearsal spaces and voice rehearsal and dance rehearsal spaces. And there's a printmaking studio, a ceramicist studio, a whole bunch of artist studios separate from that, a daycare, which we're really excited about.
That's interesting because now you're bringing together people of different ages.
Exactly. And with different timelines in their day. So, children show up early and maybe theater performances happen late at night. So activating a place 24 hours a day also makes a safer place, and people are more comfortable to spend time there. So we're excited about the daycare, and then there's some design offices, a restaurant, event space, graphic designers, and sound studios.
And you've been intentional with the outdoor space too, which is kind of what we started talking about, that there's a space for people to be outside without having to go in.
Yeah, there's sort of the building sort of forms this natural courtyard, south-facing courtyard, and it's just an empty blank space right now. So we're going to put an atrium over top of it, and it kind of links all the buildings together and becomes the main entry to the building, and it's that place where anyone is welcome. So you can just come out and hang in the courtyard, and then maybe you'll start meeting artists, or you'll go to a show, or just anything can happen.
What experiences do you have with that lingering and mingling with other people, just like in your regular life that kind of you draw on as you continue to design?
I have met so many good friends at coffee shops. So just back when we were co-working at the 220, you have coffee every single day, and you just
that was a co-working space on 20th Street in Saskatoon.
Yeah, and the coffee shop was sort of the heart of the building, and that's where we would meet and greet people or you meet friends of friends, and I still have very good friends from those days just having coffee.
You even talked to me, though, about being crammed on a subway in Toronto.
Oh, right.
And what that has taught you.
Yes. So living in Toronto is totally different than living in Saskatoon. Being on the subway twice a day at least and being crammed in with that many, like you're touching that many people during your morning commute and afterwards, and it sort of breeds a kind of tolerance for everyone. So you're in this together. You realize you're just one of many. You're in this together. Everyone needs to get along, and you sort of accept everyone for who they are, and it kind of maintains this status quo. And I think that's how we just all got along in there.
You hope it breeds tolerance,
Yes.
but I do wonder what's happened to us post-pandemic. And Autumn, you mentioned that this concept came about when we were really valuing private space, large homes, large yards. And so do we still have that? Like how, Crystal, I'll start with you and then we'll go back around the table. But how would you describe the moment that we're in? I mean, I'd let you into a locked building. We used to have a coffee shop. It's no longer here. So there was nowhere to mingle at my workplace. What are your thoughts?
Yes. There's probably a direct correlation. It is interesting that when COVID happened and we lost our third places, that's when people started breaking apart, and there's, some dissemination has happened, and I think everyone's ready to come together again and connect, and I think we need to connect if we want to get along and get through this together.
Marian, what are your thoughts on that? Two things I want to ask you about, kind of where we're at post-pandemic, but also this idea that third spaces might contribute to the better good. What do you think, Marian?
Well, during the pandemic, we all moved to Zoom to deliver our programming in one form or another. But once those restrictions dropped, we were all thrilled to get back together and connect in community. At our spoken word events, our music concerts, whatever. I just think having these spaces is so critical to any municipality. It doesn't matter if it's Regina or Saskatoon or Moose Jaw or Swift Current. You need to have these spaces, whether it's art gallery or library or community rink or the hockey rink or whatever it is. They're just so important. I mean, I know at the Creative City Centre we've had at least 5 couples get married after meeting at the Creative City Centre.
Nice.
And I just think okay, what if we hadn't existed? Would those people still all be single? We've had bands start because they met as musicians at the Creative City Centre, and those bands are now touring Canada and doing things. It's just I feel like without those spaces, we would all be at home depressed, just watching Netflix or not ever talking. It's It just, to me, it's you can't have a vibrant, healthy society without having these spaces. And I'm really excited to hear about the Caswell Bus Barns. I'm excited to see that project unfold.
Yeah. Marian, as you're talking, it does make me think about we are in some ways in a loneliness epidemic. I've heard lots of people talk about that. I think about different stages of my own life, of being a single person and then being a mom, a parent of 2 small kids and feeling quite isolated in that way. I think of seniors in our community, people working from home, just all the different needs that people might have. So Autumn, I'll go to you next. What do you see as the greater good of third spaces?
I think that you need spaces where people can enjoy themselves or where they want to be, and it really builds that community. When you go to places or you visit cities and you think oh wow, that was such a cool place to be, it's usually about the space you're in and how people were connecting, not the actual physical space itself. It was your experience in that space. And so I think it really does define how a city is based on their third spaces available, not only to the residents, but to the visitors as well.
I want to go to one of our callers. So Loretta is on the line in Saskatoon. Hi, Loretta.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for the conversation on this third space. I'd like to know what parameters or ways to third spaces can dismantle class exploitation. From my lived experience, my 56 years on the planet, we've inherited design flaws of community and community design that were not necessarily original. It's just how skewed capitalism fills voids while maintaining an increased or increasing inequality or inequity. So the expectation of the uptake to be on the least resourced, the public space. And we hear it over and over again with the librarians and library staff needing to prove, like they're guilty until proven innocent, that what they have and what they're doing is viable. So meanwhile, there's...
Oh, did we just lose Loretta? I think we lost the call. Some interesting points, though, that she brought up. And Crystal, I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that equity in design and just thinking about, just some of the things that Loretta brought up. Is that top of mind for you at all?
It's interesting thinking about it through like past things that have been built,
Mm-hmm.
and then how that's affecting how we interact,
Yeah.
and then the changes coming forward.
I think we're having trouble with your mic, Crystal. So I'm going to go to Marion. Marion, the question that I'll pose to you picks up on some of what Loretta said. And what Crystal just said was that previous design can kind of impact how we interact with one another. And so, do you have any thoughts on how to create equity when it comes to the spaces that we utilize in our cities, Marion?
Well, at the Creative City Centre, we try to be as welcoming and inclusive and ensure that our programming is accessible to everybody. So, we don't charge a $50 ticket for our concerts. We charge a $10 or $15 or $20 ticket, but we also have a pay-what-you-can policy for most of our events. We take our role as a community arts center very seriously. We don't... We're not exclusive to only those people who can afford to partake in the arts. One of our campaign mottos is that art is for everyone, and that's something that we're passionate about. I would like to think that the arts, in broad terms, are something that absolutely everybody should be able to enjoy, experience. They shouldn't, it shouldn't be dependent on like what their socioeconomic status is. It shouldn't be dependent on, how much money they make. None of those things should matter when it comes to art. Everybody should be able to experience it.
Interesting. Autumn, I'm going to put a similar question to you. And in the meantime, Crystal, I'm going to have you move to the other chair because we seem to have lost your mic, and then we'll just wrap up the conversation because we're almost at the end. But Autumn, there's one thing that comes to mind just listening to that caller, and I think maybe what she was getting at, with previously designed spaces, you may not have access to these third spaces. So like in some neighborhoods, right, the zoning wasn't for mixed use. Crystal had pointed out to me prior to the show, like in Toronto, there was a pub, coffee shop on every corner. That's not always the case in Saskatchewan communities. So what do we do to create some equity if you live in a suburban neighborhood and you have to drive, so far to get to a coffee shop or to your library? I don't know. Do you have thoughts on how to create some equity in this?
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts, but we have limited time here. But from my perspective, it's about allowing those uses and ensuring that there is opportunity for those spaces to develop organically. Like going back to when this term was coined back in 1989, you see that is kind of where we started to see a lot of neighborhoods that were developed just with homes and backyard spaces, and we were losing kind of those public third spaces or spaces for people to gather, or commercial spaces weren't being zoned or allowed in particular neighborhoods. And so learning from that, we are encouraging mixed-use environments, mixed-use buildings, mixed-use neighborhoods, making sure that there's space for accessible and viable third spaces. So making sure that they're not only accessible, from a cost perspective, but from a barrier-free and physical perspective as well.
Crystal, you've been nodding along. Well, let's just check your microphone. Say test, test.
Test, test.
I think we have you.
Now? Okay.
I think we have you. Just final thoughts before we wrap up, because I know that you do a lot of projects that are taking old spaces and revamping them. So do you have any final thoughts on, if there wasn't a third space before, how can you create it?
Right. I think the community itself has a lot of power to ask for these spaces and can ask city administrations to start zoning them into places, and then development companies can start building them out. So I think there's a lot of power with the people there, and they're not hard to do. You just need people to show up.
And support from the community, because that was a big part of what the Bus
Huge
Barns
part.
project needed, right?
Yeah, it wouldn't have happened without our community association.
And what were they asking for?
They were specifically asking for an arts and culture hub with a place to hang out and an activated block on the street that had just been so quiet for so long.
Okay. Marion, any final thoughts from you before we say goodbye?
No, just, I encourage people to get out and support their local community centers, whether it's the brew pub on the corner or the community arts center or, the neighborhood center. Like we do have these spaces and they only work if people use them. So, creativecitycentre.ca is our website if anybody's interested in what we do and how we do it.
Love it. Autumn, any final words from you on how people could maybe take advantage of what does already exist?
No, I liked what Marion said. Use your spaces that are available, and recognize that is the way that we build community, is by connecting with each other and making sure that these spaces are used in that way.
So good to have all of you today. Sorry, Crystal, for a few technical difficulties, but it's been great having this conversation. So Autumn, thank you. Marion, thank you. And Crystal, thanks to you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Autumn Dawson, Director of Planning and Development Services with the City of Regina, Marion Donnelly, CEO and founder of the Creative City Centre, and Crystal Buchert, owner of Building Studio Inc. I'm Alicia Grabinski. Another thing that comes to mind in this conversation is how these third spaces are often used by newcomers to our country, especially when we think about libraries, right? The CEO of Regina Public Libraries had some examples on that. And so that does connect to tomorrow's show, because there are new people coming to our country every day in pursuit of a better life. But does reality meet the dream? On the next Blue Sky, we're checking in on recent immigrants to this province. We'll have a discussion about the challenges in finding meaningful work in their field. And we'll find out what programs are most helpful in helping people make connections in a province that is very much who you know. So we'd love to hear from you tomorrow. You can join the conversation between 12 and 1 right here on CBC Radio 1.